I thought when looking at the theme, it's now becoming much more important in terms of sustainable economic development, especially economic resilience, and also the climate change and sustainable development becoming part of economic development and economic agenda. I think I thought that would be there's some relevance. I thought why should I not come and trying to share some of the thoughts while admitting I'm not an expert in this area. I know there are a lot of experts here, and good to see some familiar faces. Professor Sandhu Senrat, a long time family friend. Professor Hemantiran Singh, my batchmate at the University of California. And I can remember I was here some time ago when I was a director of research, came and presented a paper, have a discussion in this symposium. I can't remember which year. So anyway, let me share some of the thoughts that I have my some of the points drafted by my research staff at the central bank, because I'm not, again, I have to say I'm not an expert. It may be little familiar facts and information that I'm going to share with you, and I thought it is important for them. And also let me congratulate the faculty, the department, especially unique position and the contribution that this department is making. Forestry and environment science is an important area, and also I think it's the only department that's basically focusing on research and development in this area. I think this is becoming a much more important agenda in a development perspective, as well as not only locally but globally. So when I look at the theme, I think it's very perceptive to conceive economic resilience and environmental sustainability as a very appropriate theme for this year's symposium, especially when you look at the economic resilience and the pain that we are going through. I'm not going to talk a lot about the economy and the issues and problems, because we have been talking too much in the public, and I shared my view. Anyway, this is a matter that has been at the forefront of global policy circles in the past year or so, especially when you look at the global issues on the climate change and the environment. The pressure to tackle environment sustainability has been extremely high for all countries in the world lately, with unsatisfactory progress being made towards the 2025 target to limit global warming and the climate hazards taking place all over the world. Every country, more or less, is facing economic hardships at the moment. Inflation, like in Sri Lanka, a lot of other countries, has been very high in both developed and developing countries. Borrowing costs have also increased, and economic growth rates have been low relative to the several decades earlier. And also, energy prices increased highly in the most of the countries in the world, and for the people living in cold climates, this has been an especially burdensome winter. It's unfortunate that as soon as the world started to emerge out of the pandemic, we had to deal with efforts of war that created havoc in global markets. Environmental issues are also doing their part to add economic hardships. Despite all these issues, the rest of the world has not made economic hardships a reason to scale back on environmental efforts, and neither should we. So let me focus on economic resilience as a long-term concept that's much more important and relevant in this under this theme and these days. In economic policy making, especially ones that have to do with managing resilience at a time of crisis, long-term concerns such as the environment tend to get downplayed. However, now we have realized the efforts of neglecting long-term sustainability and focusing on short-term survival only. This is what the point raised by the Acting Vice Chancellor as well. This is why we are facing a crisis of this magnitude even after 16 IMF bailout packages, and this is going to be the 17th during the last 60 years in Sri Lankan history. We neglected a lot of fundamental issues and did not place a robust foundation for our country to grow on. Rather, we focused on quick fixes to wipe away immediate problems only. The current issue, which is the foreign currency issue, that has been looming for decades now. Since independence, Sri Lanka hardly had a trade surplus, and deficit of imports or exports kept growing over several decades. This led to foreign borrowings to finance imports and investments, and borrowing debt kept gathering and piling up over the years. This is why we are in this debt crisis now. So we borrow to repay debt, and we borrow to import and consume, gathering more debt. The overly manipulated low exchange rate enabled this to happen. With low import costs, price signals and resource allocation in the economy was so distorted, and there were no incentives to industrialize or improve the productivity or in our agriculture sector or service sector, or to diverse exports and create organic growth. So these are the issues that we have been having for several decades. The dependency type social contract is created in which the government had to import and supply even the basic essentials at low cost and subsidize utilities and energy, while providing salaries and pensions to an overwhelming segment of the population, created massive government budget deficits, and the government borrowed massively in rupee terms too. In this way, government crowded out private investments, with banks channeling people's savings, that is deposits, to government securities and investments. The situation drew up interest rates offered by banks for loans applied by the public and reduced funds available for the private sector to borrow and invest. So these are the current issues that we are facing. I'm sure we all know the difficulties now we are going through. The correction of such issues needs structural adjustments, in other words, sacrifices. It is the same with the addressing environmental issues. We have to make sacrifices now and put in place better systems so that true resilience can be protected over a medium to long term period. Therefore, this time our efforts to come out of crisis, we aim towards true resilience, resilience that is aimed towards the long term with well-being of people in our minds. Now let me just share a few thoughts on the relationship between the environment, sustainability and economic resilience, how that can basically ensure the long-term sustainability and resilience of the economy. The economy is entirely dependent on the environment, and we cannot ignore that any more economic activities that harm the environment causes the environment to harm the economy back in return. We can no longer treat environmental issues as a matter that concerns environmental professionals only. Environmental concerns are part and parcel of every segment of policymaking in the country. This is why the UO faculty is playing an important role in this regard. We Central Bank too places a prominent place on environment concerns now as part of our main policy agenda. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you about latest research findings on environmental concerns of Sri Lanka and the world in this kind of research symposiums. However, we are aware that quite a lot of lasting economic issues and episodic occurrences are due to environmental issues. According to published research, Sri Lanka has experienced significant temperature rise in the recent decades. Meanwhile, a trend in decreasing annual precipitation has also been found. It's also observed that number of consecutive dry days has increased over 20th century, and the number of consecutive wet days has decreased. Protection indicates a trend of consistent warming and an increasing intensity of external rainfall. I think I'm sure you are familiar with all these things. The economy suffered significantly from climate-related issues in the past 2 decades, such as you all know the floods, droughts, erratic rainfall patterns, heat waves, and landslides. If this trend continues or worsens, there will be worse effects on the economy that we cannot afford to go through as we try to deal with other much difficult issues. Climate change has direct effects on food supply. That's why I think important that our expert can share on the food supply. Floods, droughts, erratic rainfall patterns, and alien pests have been affecting supply of rice and other food crops and export crops significantly in the recent past. Meanwhile, factors such as carbon dioxide availability, temperature, water availability, soil organic matter, transformation, changes in pests and disease profile also affect growth of plants and production of food. Rising temperatures and ocean acidification affect fish availability, which is an important food item in our country. This is why the research in these areas by science faculties in the university like yours is very important. Lack of food supply in turn leads to other negative effects such as inflation, low welfare of rural farm community, having to expend scarce foreign currency on food importation, and loss of export income from agricultural products such as tea, rubber, coconut. Atmospheric warming and climate change effects lead to destruction of property, infrastructure and loss of lives through flooding and landslides every year in Sri Lanka. More covertly, research has found that heat stress leads to low labor productivity. Outdoor heavy manual labor jobs are mostly performed by the low-income people. Therefore, their health and welfare effects will be affected more by this scenario. Heat stress will also increase the demand for cooling systems for houses and other buildings, increasing the demand for energy at this point. The effects of climate change on energy generation have been severe. Sri Lanka's dependence on hydropower is high, is currently last year 34% of our energy generation. We already know the pain of lack of rainfall on energy generation. This issue is severe when global oil prices are high because Sri Lanka is very serious foreign currency issue and dependent on thermal coal for power generation. Adverse climate, natural disasters and pollution have a negative impact on tourism, an industry which Sri Lanka is unfortunately heavily reliant for foreign exchange incomes, at least for the near future due to lack of export sophistication and export diversity, which can earn more foreign exchange for the country. For those of us in Sri Lanka, climate change and global warming are not the only environmental issues. Biodiversity loss, threat to wildlife, resource depletion, garbage accumulation, pollution of water and soil and air quality all are serious issues which our country has not been successful dealing with. In fact, this has become a regional issue, especially in the subcontinent India. We have seen the much more impact on the environment in those countries more than Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's forest cover is other important factor that you probably are familiar with. It's estimated at 1.86 million hectares in 2021, according to submission to Central Bank from the Forestry Department of the government. Sri Lanka's forestry cover had reduced from the previous climate estimate of 1.995 million hectares that was made in 2010. It's over 10 years it has also continued to declining. With the land area of 62,705 square kilometers, excluding inland waters, this amount to just 30% of forest cover. Sri Lanka was targeting in 2017 to increase forest cover to 32% by 2030, according to submission to the UN. Meanwhile, the extent of deforestation in a year is about 1,000 hectares, according to information from the Forestry Department. But frequently complaints of deforestation, I'm sure you are familiar with these issues, against government and private sector companies, authorities appear in several media. All this seems to point out the need to increase forest cover in Sri Lanka and improve the regulatory framework for forest offences. If not, even attraction of foreign direct investment and Sri Lanka's industrialization and export expansion aspiration can get adversely affected. Then other issue is a wildlife issue, which are extremely high in Sri Lanka because of forest coverage issues and aspect we cannot ignore even from an economic perspective. Let me share some of the figures. I think I have a lot of details. I don't want to spend a lot of time. It is reported that these, in terms of leopards, wild elephants, they are at the risk of extinction. Every year there are a number of the reported deaths of elephants, leopards. That there are numbers I'm sure you are familiar with. I don't want to take a lot of time to share all these figures. Sri Lanka made headlines in the world in 2017. You all can remember when a garbage dump collapsed and which killed 28 people in Colombo. Meanwhile, the Central Environment Authority is deploying a massive workforce to raid illegal polythene manufacturing and seizes tons of illegally manufactured harmful polythene products every year. Can we be satisfied about management of environmental degradation in Sri Lanka, despite a lot of efforts that have been and resources have been deployed for this process? Another area is illegal mining for mineral resources, so that's also rife. According to media reports, causing environmental issues, the country has never had a mineral resource policy, and some minerals such as mica and kaolin, which Sri Lanka has some of the world's finest, have already been completely extracted away. Sri Lanka's very minuscule export earns from exporting our country's non-replenishable resources. Are we doing this to scout into plan with the long-term benefit of future generation in mind? I'm not sure whether this is one of the area that you could do some research and come out with policy recommendations how to basically optimize the available scarce resources in mineral. All this is not to mention water pollution. This is other area: water pollution, soil pollution, noise pollution, air pollution, all sorts of other hazards economic activities are continuously causing. Diseases stemming from pollution are claiming lives and making people ill every day, causing a burden on the healthcare system of the country. Increased environmental debate surely increases the healthcare burden in the country, which the public finance cannot afford in these days. We know the pressure on the public finance as taxpayers on the healthcare and education expenses. The factors causing most of this environment degradation and harm to humans are economic matters. However, these are not issues we cannot plan and manage to reduce their impact. It is time to own up to damage we have caused, measure the damage we are causing now, and start making preparations. The central bank, from our role, the central bank and the government have been doing much lately to support the environment preservation drive, reduce the adverse impact on the environmental from economic activities, and direct fund flow activities that support environment preservation. That's why the central bank has some role. We work together with the International Financial Corporation, the IFC is part of the World Bank, to create what we call sustainable finance roadmap and the taxonomy that we recently launched. The climate prosperity plan was drafted and has been drafted under the guidance of His Excellency the President, which was recently launched. That's also another recent measure government has taken. Meanwhile, more research and more planning are needed to actually ensure that the environmental impact of economic activities will be minimum, and we are actually working to make reparation to the damage we have already caused. Key aspect of this energy generation, economic growth, and increase in incomes of people means that the energy requirement is high. Annually, we burn a massive amount of coal to generate electricity at a low cost, much lower than the cost of petroleum oils. We import well over 2 million metric tons of coal annually. Then you all familiar, even these days, issue of lack of foreign exchange and rupee availability to import coal that is causing a number of hours of power cuts these days. However, we have to use this much of coal because we cannot afford to increase the share of fuel oils used to generate electricity because of Sri Lanka's foreign currency shortage. Therefore, improving our economic resilience is also needed to make investments to improve environmental resilience in areas that can generate renewable energy. Borrowings to set up power plants or power generation equipment such as solar panels should also be done with the surefire plan to increase foreign currency earnings of Sri Lanka so that loans can be paid off with export income, not with more borrowings as we have been doing in the past. We have to increase Sri Lanka's own efforts to create and use renewable energy sources. We also need to economize energy uses in the country. We have to think of measures such as increasing the usage of public transport and reduction of lighting and cooling requirements in the building in the country. Reducing the use of private vehicles which consume fossil oil is a key aspect that we need to promote. We also have to seriously consider and plan a reforestation drive and an animal habitat protection drive. We have to seriously reconsider our mineral extraction policies, as I mentioned earlier. We also have to systematically plan to reduce the reliance on chemical fertilizer. Similarly, we have to strengthen quarantine of import materials to reduce harm from alien pests. We have to reduce non-biodegradable garbage as much as possible, increase recycling, and make sustainable use of garbage. There are a lot of things that we should be doing, and I'm sure you also would be doing a lot of research in these areas. There's huge potential to do research and innovation given the importance of these issues emerging for climate change and the economic resilience. Other countries, both developed and developing countries, have taken innovative steps to increase environmental accountability. The world talks of green gross domestic GDP, the green GDP, it's a concept how you measure GDP in terms of the climate and environmental account. Which is a GDP calculation that makes adjustment for environment damage cost. I can recommend that the Central Bank and Minister of Finance produce annual reports to the public about the economy and covering all sectors of the economy. Comprehensive centralized period reporting about the environment, covering all aspects of the environment such as climate, atmospheric warming, wildlife, mineral resources, pollution, etc. be made available to public by an identified authorities too. It can improve awareness among all people about environmental concerns and effectively coordinate policy actions among the policymakers like Central Bank, Minister of Finance, and the academic and research like yours. Finally, all in all, we cannot ignore the environment in this drive to stabilize the economy and place it on a growth path. If we ignore the environment and harm the environment more, our growth efforts will be short-lived and will not accomplish true welfare improvement for all of us, all public in the country. So even now, as we try hard to manage the crisis, we have to act to protect the environment, every aspect of it. In short, we have to build the plane as we fly it. It will not be a hard task. The majority comes to understand the economic hardships as well as the environmental hardships and understand that change in the way we have been doing things and making sacrifices are needed to create a truly resilient living environment for all of us where both economic and social welfare are taken care of. Thank you very much.